Welcome to the Untold Tales audio anthology. The following is a story by Howard Loring, narrated by Dr. Jeffrey A. Robinson. How It All Started, or The Short History of Dogs. The young, upright man, in reality still only a boy, had smelled the cooking meat from quite a distance. It was compelling. The wafting aroma was mesmerizing, faint at first but unmistakable, growing stronger with each tentative step that he took, tearing away at his empty stomach, forcing him ever forward. Finding himself in unfamiliar territory, the youngster was understandably leery, but also being very hungry, he continued through the thick underbrush with a determined purpose in an unending quest. He knew that he had to find nourishment or he would die. Then, to whom would he tell his strange story? He'd eaten a little the day before, too agitated by the gathering to come, for it was the first such endeavor that he'd ever been permitted to accompany. Due to his age, before this, his never-ending chores of toting water from the river or dragging tea limbs for the ever-present fire had always been in close proximity to his clan's current, well-defended enclosure. No excitement there, to be sure. Of course, the youth had often longed to join in one of these gatherings, seemingly a hopeless wish given his tender years. Still, he dreamed of the day, for it was his undeniable path, as it was for each of the clan's boys. His time would come. Then, on one of his last wood-collecting expeditions, he'd found a heavy branch that made for him, with little augmentation, a fine club. All the mature, upright men had admired his new weapon, hefting and swinging it, testing its strength and balance. Each had been impressed by the unexpected discovery. His uncle, the headman of the clan, was most pleased, taking the find as an omen predicting a plentiful gathering. As a consequence, he allowed his nephew to join the upcoming venture. Sadly, this snap judgment had proved a mistake. All the gatherings were, and always had been, unpredictable things, the outcomes ever in doubt. Still, the clan's most recent location was extremely bountiful, and of late all such expeditions had indeed been successful. Each time the upright men had returned both cheerful and fully laden with meat. The gathering party took to the great river before dawn, paralleling its meandering path, following the clan's standard operating procedure. Several times along the way, the uprights noticed promising footprints of the forelegs at the water's edge, an event that engendered much excited interest. However, nothing came of them as they petered out once the ground became further inland from the river's bank, and so the determined party had returned each time to its previous route. Gathering from the forelegs was best possible scenario, for they could have beaten off their kill with little trouble. Often this kill was a large animal. The forelegs were formidable, always hunting in numbers that employed coordinated attack, and this strategy was highly effective in bringing almost anything down. Yet, if they were attacked with sufficient preparation, successfully employing the tactics of surprise and overwhelming force, the forelegs would quickly relent and run off. The gathering party would then divide their efforts. Some of them would butcher the kill while the others stood guard, protecting the periphery of the grisly action. The forelegs always took a dim view of this, of course. They never retreated very far at first, but hung at a distance, growling and snapping at each other in their displeasure over losing their kill. At some point, though, compelled by hunger, they would be off in search of more game, and often this occurred before the meaty prize had been hacked into smaller pieces suitable for transport. The other hunters in the area, such as the deadly Longclaws, were not so obliging. They were to be avoided at all times, for backing down and running away wasn't in their fierce nature. No, they attacked to protect their kill, and they were much larger, highly aggressive, and more dangerous than the forelegs were. Fortunately, their deeply resonant growl and loud, piercing cries could be heard at great distance, and usually the ferocious creatures could be given wide berth. Of course, this was not always possible, and chance meetings sometimes occurred. When they did, the standard outcome never favored the upright men. The Longclaws had very long teeth, too. The clan's ancestors had learned all these hard-earned lessons ages ago in olden times. They hadn't been forgotten in the great interim since. Many well-known and oft-repeated stories told of such horrifying encounters. No, the forelegs were clearly the best choice, and the clan always preferred gathering from them, but where were they now? Late in the day and far from home, the weary, upright men turned a sharp bend in the river only to find a large, horned one lying dead on the bank. Nothing seemed to be near, although it was evident that the fresh carcass had been fed upon. The group advanced with alacrity to investigate, but only when they were up on the beast did the shocking truth become known. Behind it, shielded by its very size, rested 2 sleeping cubs of the terrifying great one of the forest. This was a most surprising turn, having frightening consequences, for before the upright men could react, the cub's mother broke from the nearby scrub. Very large and bristling, she was already snarling in anger at this intrusion, berserk now in her attempt to protect her young ones. The startled group of gatherers was no match for her massive claws and great bulk. Several of them were immediately mauled before they could move away, and more were quickly run down and dispatched as her cubs, awakened by unknown sounds, began crying loudly in fear. This event propelled their mother into further frenzy, and she viciously lashed out, unhindered by any thought, fueled only by her terrible rage. The young, upright boy, proudly clutching his fine new club, had been among the first gatherers to reach the dead horned one. Soon he was caught with a tremendous backhanded blow from the giant swinging paw of the great one, who was madly thrashing about, consumed by her impassioned slaughtering. It was as if a tree had hit him and he was thrown unceremoniously into the great river. This alone had saved him. Of course, the youth couldn't swim. None of the upright men could. The always churning, never-ending river was very much viewed as a mystical thing by the clan, so they had yet to even learn how to fish. But the boy, stunned, had nevertheless somehow floated to a passing log that bore him downstream, and thus away from the horrid carnage still viciously transpiring on the now overly bloody and gory bank. After some time of desperately clutching the log, he was rudely deposited ashore after his transport was beached while traversing a long bend in the river. The exhausted youngster had pulled himself up further on the bank and collapsed in a heap. It was then that he smelled the cooking meat in the distance. Naturally, the boy was unsure of his location, but that didn't matter. He had to eat soon, or he would never live to find his way home, if that were even possible now. He began to move, honing in on the enticing scent of roasting flesh. Evening was near and approaching swiftly. Soon he wouldn't be able to discern anything in the quickly growing gloom. Next, however, he saw the piercing light of a fire in the distance, shrouded by the surrounding forest. The calling aroma was strong now. It turned his empty stomach into knots. He crept closer, taking care to move as quietly as possible, always forward toward the illumination beyond, which at this point was enveloped by the deepening darkness. At last he could see the entire scene through the underbrush. A fine campsite had been laid in a small clearing, rimmed by huge boulders. A giant fire, blazing away, cast flickering shadows against the rocks and shrubbery around them. He saw no one about. It seemed the whole area was deserted. He did see the meat, though, sizzling on a spit very near the fire, a huge hunk dripping tasty fat. Who would leave such a treasure unattended? Instinctively, he reached for his sharpened butchering stone, the most valuable object that everyone carried during a gathering. A highly prized implement, carefully chiseled with precision to fit the owner's hand. He found it missing, as was, of course, his fine new club. He should have realized that the unforgiving waterway had already swallowed both of his precious tools. The young upright man next judged himself not only lost and alone, which he was, but now totally weaponless as well. Yet here he was wrong. His finest instrument, possessed by every member of his clan as well as those scattered around like them, had been minutely honed through time itself from the very beginnings of his kind. It was a natural development unique to the now fully defined species, and no other thing possessed it. Nothing came close, not even the lumbering, flat-headed men in the area who were generally so similar in ways to the uprights. This singular superior weapon at present being furiously employed to assess the situation was his very large human brain. This particular circumstance, however, was difficult to understand. Where was the owner of the meat, he wondered, and why had they left such an item unprotected? Upright men cooked their food, of course, but they weren't the only ones to do so. The Flatheads had fire as well, and they, according to the clan's ancient lore, were the first ones who unlocked its hidden secrets, and they could be fearsome. At last he could stand it no longer. He broke through the brush and dashed to the spit, thinking only at first of grabbing the roasting meat and beating a hasty retreat. Yet after laying hands on the greasy haunch, he instead had a much better idea. The boy sank to his knees and bit into the still sizzling flesh. Nothing had ever tasted so good to him, and he moaned in delight as the succulent juices dripped down his face. Despite his earlier trepidation, he sat by the fire and ate with gusto, unconcerned now with what might happen next. After savoring several mouthfuls, he reconsidered, thinking again of dashing off with his purloined meal, but he didn't. He was so exhausted he found that he couldn't move, only concentrate on the task at hand. He reasoned if the food's owner did return and killed him, well, at least by then he'd die with a full stomach. While munching away, he heard movement in the brush, the sound of someone approaching. The youngster, still chewing as fast as he could, sat in place and awaited his fate. At this stage, no other viable option was left open to him. An upright man then appeared, but unlike any that he'd ever seen before. He was very tall as a flathead, but unlike them, he was thin and dressed in a bizarre fashion. He wore no stitched animal skins, but some kind of covering that, aside from his hands and face, totally wrapped him, clinging tightly to his body. "Welcome," he said, but the boy didn't respond. The newcomer held out his arms, his palms open, and pointed toward the youngster who had stopped his mastication at that action. A few seconds later, the upright man dropped his hands. Then he smiled. "Welcome," he said again, and this time the interloper replied. "I'm hungry," the boy related, as if that would explain everything. It did. The upright man smiled again and then sat on a large stone at the edge of the firelight. "I know," he answered. "I cooked it for you. I knew that you'd make your way here to this clearing tonight." The boy's eyes opened widely as he considered it. Could this be so? Then, with a shrug, he commenced his meal, knowing that no other immediate danger awaited him. Yet, after swallowing, he asked, "How?" Now the sitting man considered. He rearranged himself, and crossing his long legs, he leaned forward. After a bit, he answered. "I know much," he stated his fact. "I know that today was your first gathering, and I know the result. This adventure will make for you a fine story to tell." At this, the boy only grunted. How would he ever get back to his clan, and how would he ever tell his story if he didn't? He knew not. Again, he sank his teeth into the roast, but without frenzy now, in a slower and more deliberate pace, still thinking. The stranger spoke no more, for the present only waiting for the boy to finish his meal. He understood that the youngster's mind was racing, trying to comprehend. He was content to sit and let him try. Soon enough, the upright boy was satiated, his stomach now overly full. Still chewing his last bite, he stared down at the meat in his hands. Then he held it out to the stranger, offering the leftovers, but the man shook his head, declining. "Take it with you on the morrow," he said. "Just head back to the river and follow its bank, but moving against the current this time. You'll be home by nightfall." The boy nodded. It made sense. He would do so. Then he thought of something else. "What of the others?" he asked. Of course, this question referred to the ambushed gathering party. Here the man, while giving no answer, answered all by silence. The boy sighed, already knowing the truth. He'd reflected on the horrific episode while clinging to the log in the river. The great one of the forest was the most fearsome thing known, and the females were ever tenacious when their clubs were involved. He thought first of his uncle, and then the others, the best uprights in the clan, each gone. Who would gather now? How would they ever survive this horrific loss? The strange man understood his concerns. He felt sorry for the boy, but only in a peripheral, disconnected fashion. He had to remain above the fray, so to speak. After all, time does march on, and always it will have its due. "Other clans would welcome you," he said in a comforting voice. "Your women and children are a wonderful asset. The greater numbers help ensure the future. You must lead them, your clan, to another clan, and so save them." The young, upright boy was rendered speechless by this bold suggestion. How could he leave them, or what was left of them? He was just a boy, lost and helpless. "You now have a powerful story," instructed the man, "for there's a grander purpose behind it. It has meaning beyond the event itself, a lesson to be learned. So they will listen and agree with your assessment. Why wouldn't they?" "What purpose?" asked the incredulous youth, who certainly saw none. The whole thing was senseless as far as he could judge. The gathering was nothing but a colossal failure. He boldly looked the man in the face, awaiting an answer. "You must change the way you gather meat. said the stranger calmly, as if it were a foregone conclusion. Another way must be found, a better way. A moment went by, the boy deep in thought. How? He asked for a second time. The strange man then slowly stood, and after a moment, holding out his hands in reassurance, he stepped over and sat closer to the boy. "Why do you always chase the four legs away?" he asked quietly. "They're the ones who find your meat after all. Do you not have to go out and waste your time locating them over and over again when the next gathering is needed?" Now the youngster was really confused. How could you not chase them away? The hard-earned carcass was their prize, and they didn't give it up freely without some sort of altercation. He began to answer as such, but the man cut him off by continuing, "Why not instead give them some of the kill? It's easily done, for they never run far. You know this to be true. You could just throw them some of the meat." "Why?" blurted the boy. "It's our food, then. Why give it away?" Again the stranger smiled, understanding the boy's perplexed state. Change, once made, could take hold quickly, but embracing this choice often required great amount of time to accomplish. Yet small steps were still forward progress. "But if you gave them some, they would stick by close, and they'd gladly follow you home if you fed them along the way. Then you wouldn't have to find them when the meat was gone. Once you stopped feeding them, they'd just go off and search for more, yet you could follow them. Is this not so?" "But they're killers," said the boy, now the one trying to explain. How, he marveled, could such an absurd thing even be contemplated? This was not the established way. "But do they kill?" asked the man, "after they're chased off? Do they attack you as you butcher the carcass as the long claws would?" "No, they just get angry and then they move on." The boy shook his head. This was too much. It was unheard of. "It's never done," he stated flatly, as if that closed the subject. Again the stranger paused. Another approach was needed now, that much was evident. He held one in reserve, of course. He leaned in some and quietly asked, "How did the upright men first come by fire, I wonder? There was a distant age long ago when you had none. Is this not true? Many stories from the olden times say as much, do they not?" The boy had to admit that this was so. Everyone knew the uprights had stolen fire from the flatheads, for they were the only ones who knew how to make it. As such, keeping the fire lit was always a prime concern for the clan. Sometimes it did go out, of course, a big problem. Other clans had to share then, but they only did so after some price had been paid. Finding fire in the forest was always possible. It had happened before, but it wasn't very likely, and the more prudent course was to make sure that it never died out in the first place. But the boy, young as he was, had made this vital connection. Things change. Even the oldest established ways must have been new once. He saw this. Yes, now he understood that change was very real and perhaps inevitable. The day's bizarre events had proved as much. And he certainly didn't wish to repeat that particular change if he could help it, not if it could be avoided, that is. So he mused after reflection, perhaps this would be better. Then the young boy casually made another most critical connection. It was one that went beyond the moment, critical as it turned out to the very future of his species. And this simple train of thought would soon beget profound historical ramifications. For the concept easily defended by example, the most important, pertinent tenet of humanity itself. "Well," he said at last, "I guess I'll never know unless I try." It turned out that he did try, and he succeeded too. Once his decimated clan had effectively joined with another, the novel approach was instigated, and it proved most advantageous. The forelegs indeed followed the gathering uprights, and they hung close by until the meat was gone as predicted. Gatherings then became hugely profitable. After the clan took to the forest, almost at once, the forelegs would find a scent, and with little trouble they would then run some prey aground. Abundant meat was thus found every day. There were other benefits to the arrangement as well. The forelegs were wonderful sentries. Nothing in night could creep up on them, or, by extension, the clan. They still kept their distance, but the animals inherently understood the advantages too, and they protected the clan. Living near the upright men supplied a safe environment in which to raise their young. True, their kill was taken from them, but the meat they were always given was enough, and this was their main concern. They stayed. There were only 5 of them at first, a small pack consisting of an alpha couple and 3 juveniles, 2 males and 1 female. Soon enough, more pups followed. This event was viewed as a good omen by the clan, and it was. Then, after several seasons had passed, the forelegs one night raised a cry in the dark. The hair-raising shrieks of one of the long claws was soon heard in the distance. A loud altercation then ensued, very brief but brutal. Then all was quiet. The next morning the boy, who was now a strapping teenager, found at some distance a dead forelegs, lacerated by the long claws. Her pack was nowhere to be seen, having run off in angry pursuit in order to harass the retreating predator. The boy was unconcerned by this, as they often ran off, and he knew from experience they would return soon, demanding meat. It was then that he discovered the pups, newly orphaned and whimpering in the grass. They were young, hardly weaned, and almost without thinking he took them inside the clan's fortified enclosure. They became instant celebrities. Again, they were 5, 4 brothers and a sister. They snapped and growled much, but due to their tiny size, they posed no real problems. That soon changed. The 2 largest males, angling for dominance, became a danger because they consistently wished to demonstrate their fierceness. Within weeks, the boy again, without a thought, clubbed them both. That left 2 males and the female. These pups grew, and in time joined the pack outside the upright space. While not really tame, at a distance, they interacted much more with the clan, and were even permitted entry into their enclosure if they wished. They were easily tolerated there, if not provoked by being approached too closely or too quickly. Once, the young female bore pups, being proud, and she brought them in for inspection, and they too became instant celebrities. Again, the boy, now a man in earnest, clubbed the most vicious babies, and the offspring of the tamer survivors were more tolerant still. This now entrenched protocol continued unabated. By the 5th generation, taking less than 10 full seasons, the newest born pups, while hunting every day in the forest, stayed every night within the enclosure, content, if still irascible at times. The boy, currently a fully mature man, realized they now preferred the company of the uprights to their wilder kin, still ensconced at the encampment's edge. 10 more seasons came and went. The boy, having lived nearly 30 years, was now an old man. He had many good dogs by then, and they all loved him. One day he sat on the great river's broad bank. The scene was idyllic. shaded with the air neither hot nor cold. But he was thinking of another instance along the water's edge. That particular time, he recalled, had not been so pleasant. He was remembering the day it had all started. Then he heard someone approaching, and the strange, upright man appeared, stepping from the brush. He looked exactly the same, as if the passing seasons had no hold on him. They didn't, of course, for he was a time traveler. "Well, my friend," the man said to the one who was once only lost and hungry, "you have done much good work. I knew you would. Does it please you?" The old one, pausing to consider, reached over and scratched the ear of his nearest companion, which wagged its tail in response to the tender action. Then the upright realized that none of his dogs, before ever vigilant, had reacted in the least to the stranger's advance. Yet upon short reflection, given the context, the upright man knew this wasn't a surprising circumstance. "I am content," he announced at last, "for the clan has much meat, and I'm amazed that the dogs now love and protect us. So yes, I'm very pleased that a change was made, and that it was you who found me in the forest so long ago." This sentiment caused the time traveler to laugh aloud. He sat near the upright as he had done the last time. Then he caressed the dog, stretched prone between them. Again the animal wagged its tail, thumping slowly this time. "But you were the one who found me," the tall man pointed out. "You could have given up in the river or at its bank, yet you didn't relent, only bravely pushed on." The old man hunched his shoulders, replying, "I was hungry." They both enjoyed this banter, each chuckling some, and after a time the old man asked, "What will happen now?" "More change," was the time traveler's answer. "It is always so. It will always be so. Forever." The old man nodded, knowing it was true. "But how?" he probed, wishing clarification. "What new changes will come? What will happen next?" The stranger leaned in, again as he had done in their last encounter, and after a bit he answered with, "The upright man is a strong animal, and he thinks. Now he can hunt, not just gather, so he can provide for and protect himself as well." The old one nodded. "But when an upright man takes himself a family," came next, "he will always protect them too." The old one nodded again, adding yes. "The families of his kin are also his family," the stranger next explained, "for they are related, and when many such families join, they become a clan, as yours has. Every member of this clan is now also his kin, for they are all connected in the same way. So a man will protect his clan as well as his own, for they are the same." "Yes," the old man said once more. "Now," the man said, "you have dogs in your family, and they will protect you too, for they're a part of your clan as well. Because of them, your clan will grow and become much stronger. Other clans will do this also, but then all clans will grow stronger." "I see it," nodded the old one. But next he saw something else. It was another correlation. He didn't like its portent, but he understood it well enough. "They will squabble with each other for the best meat," he predicted. "They will fight over the finer ground that it has, and soon they will club each other to acquire it, in order to provide for and so protect their family." "Yes," the stranger concurred, but then he added, "Yet at some point certain clans will join together, forming a tribe, and things will become very different then." The upright man was surprised by this assertion. "These new tribes, they will not fight each other?" "No, they will fight," was the answer. That is not my meaning. I mean that tribes will fight for a different reason, a new reason. Tribe members will do battle for those not related to them, for in tribes there are many that aren't connected by family ties. This new concept once took the old one back. Who would fight for those who weren't related? And then he thought of his beloved dogs, so different from the upright men, and he understood, again making the proper connection. Next, once seeing the consequences, the old man expanded upon them. Yes, he easily sensed the broader implications involved. His very large human brain, ancient by current standards, still worked, and it worked very well. Such new tribes, after growing ever stronger, will then band together, he asked of the stranger. In the far future, yes, was the answer. The tribes will become states, and the states will become mighty nations, and the strongest of these nations will grow further still, becoming vast empires. The old man was amazed by this insightful declaration. It was a great vision, no doubting that. He was humbled. The stranger slowly stood and added, "All because of the dogs, my friend. It will happen because you made this very vital connection and took them in. Everything now changes because you tried something different by thinking in a new and unexpected way." The astounded upright sighed after this lofty pronouncement. He turned to look at the time traveler before him. Again he hunched his shoulders, adding a wistful smile. "I was hungry," he reiterated, as if that explained everything. It did, and the tall stranger then walked away for the last time. Thank you for listening. As you know by now, we love our listeners, fans, patrons, and supporters. Please let us know what you think of our podcast and our stories. The best way to do that is to subscribe to our podcast at untold-tales.com. By doing so, you'll be added to our mailing list so you can be notified of upcoming episodes, blogs, and other information. Thanks again for listening, and have a great day.